Are we ready? Are we ready?
Yes.
Okay. Ready? So, welcome back. I'm still an alcoholic after lunch. I didn't drink anything, not even beer, so your people looked after me. That was very good. I have some questions. And I'm going to get to these in whatever order I get to them. Someone asked at the end of the last session, how do you forgive people when they're 100% wrong? The answer, funnily enough, they thought of this and they put the answer on the top of page 66. And they talk about our conclusion that the world and its people were often quite wrong. And quite in American English means completely wrong. In British English it means reasonably wrong. But this was written by Americans, so it means completely wrong. But this is where I have to be careful where my head is. Is my head at the material level, or is my head at the spiritual level? At the material level, the world seems to have rules, and if those rules are obeyed, then people get along, and if those rules are not obeyed, those spiritual laws are not obeyed, people in real time undergo suffering. A little slower. I'll share something from my own experience. When I was, as I said, when I was a teenager, some bad things happened. And at the time, that caused suffering. So, fine, we understand that. Over the many years that followed that, I retold the story in my mind again and again and again, changing it a little each time, so that 10 years later I was not being damaged by the events that happened. I was being damaged by the story I was telling myself about the events that were happening. That particular person who behaved very badly towards me for a number of years, boy, did I get my revenge. So I treated him very badly. I deliberately took steps to destroy his reputation, and certainly took steps to destroy his self-confidence, sense of who he was. I played games. Now, on page 67, the book asks me to disregard the other person entirely. So once his wrongs are disregarded, I'm left with mine. And the reason I couldn't let him go for what he did to me was because I had never made amends for what I did to him. So I went to someone who maybe... There are sociopaths and there are psychopaths. I'm told that the difference is that sociopaths learn how to act that way, whereas psychopaths are just born that way. I don't know if this person was a psychopath or a sociopath or something else. But I went back to them and I made amends for what I did. and I'm not going to go into details. He said a couple of things which changed my perspective on what had happened and made me realise that I was innocent in this whole matter. And I let him go. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't protect someone else from those sorts of actions. So there's a difference between how I respond in the material realm, which is to do everything to stop harm happening, to stop people suffering, and how I deal with it in the spiritual realm. That's the distinction. And someone asked me also about how can you trust God when God causes so many awful things in the world? It's a very common question. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands if you've ever wondered if there can be a good God in a world such as this appears to be, but there you go. You need to know this is a really old question. If you don't know this is an old question, you didn't think of it for the first time in your essay meeting last week. People have been examining this question, and so many people have examined it. It even has a name, which I think is theosophy, is trying to understand how a good God can exist in a world which appears in large part to be bad. I'm not going to try to answer the question better than the book of Job or Rabbi Harold Kushner or Simone Weil or C.S. Lewis or the many other authors who have addressed this, but I will share a couple of things I've learnt which have helped me. A friend of mine tells a story about, and this story pops up in different countries at different times, especially around war times in Europe. So whether the story is true, we don't know. Where it was true, whether it was Italy or Poland or wherever else, we don't know. But the image is of a statue of Jesus. And I'm not a Christian, by the way. I'm just passing this on. If it's useful, wonderful. If not, don't worry. Statue of Jesus with the arms blown off, and someone writing on a placard, placing the placard at the foot. A little sign, placing a sign at the base of the statue which says, "He has no hands but yours." So if anything is gonna, he has no hands but yours. So one interpretation which helps me is the reason we're here is to do God's work on earth. If we don't do it, it doesn't get done. And that helps me see where is God in a difficult situation? God is within the channel that I can have in order for God to flow through me into the world. But I need to be, as an American actor says, available to the material. He describes how he acts. He makes himself available to the material. So my job is to simply make myself available to God. And my sponsors sponsor someone in the chain. Says that recognize that God has the power to work miracles through you, specifically you. And my sponsor also tells a story about his daughter who got into AA, and she was a couple of years sober, and she had I don't know what, if you even have them here, but Hell's Angel, a sort of a big aggressive female motorcyclist in a gang of big aggressive female motorcyclists. Hell's Angels, they're called. And this was in Texas, a very religious state where Hell's Angels are not popular. And someone said to her, "You've got the wrong sponsor." And she snapped back, "Yeah, but I've got the right higher power." So God can work through whoever makes themselves available to the material. And when I look at what I think of, what my ego judges as the bad in the world, pretty much all of it is caused by people. It's not by God. I think we're given free will, and those people are acting. They have God available too. I don't have a fuller answer than that, and I don't think there is a full answer. But those authors I mentioned are a good place to start. They've all written very well about Viktor Frankl, another one. And there are a dozen others as well. A couple of other things which came out of conversations in the break. I'm a believer in working the steps as quickly as possible, but without losing the effect. And in my case, I went through the steps again very, very thoroughly when I was 15 years sober, and I got from the beginning of step 1 to the end of step 9 in 3 months, and that was with a lot of amends to make. And I recommend, 3 months, there was enough time for me to process what was happening to me, and for it to, like, if you water dry earth too quickly, it all runs off. If you do it a little more slowly, then the water goes into the soil. If you do it too slowly, the plants will die. So I do it fast enough that it doesn't kill me, but not so fast that it skims across the surface, because this is about literally rewiring the way my brain works and the pathways it goes along. And that does not happen in a weekend. Your eyes, so someone asked a question in advance about the 3-day approach to doing the steps. So they have some good people run workshops where between Friday and Sunday you go through the steps, all of the steps. And I haven't done that myself, but a friend of mine did the first one of those weekends. I won't name, it's got a little brand name, I'm not going to mention it. Did the first one of those in Tucson, I think it was Tucson, Arizona, in the late 1990s, and he's still sober. He was sober a while when he did that. And he said, it's a great introduction to the steps. And I think this is a wise response. I didn't get fixed overnight, but I didn't have to suffer for years in this process. The process can be relatively quick. But I would have to say, with some sponsees of mine, they come to AA bleeding and on fire in lots of different ways, very damaged, very broken, very shut down. And we're not going to fix everything in 3 months. So there was stuff that I could not start to face till I was 8 years sober, 15 years sober. Some stuff came up at 17. Some stuff came up at 24. Stuff is still gonna. There are rooms you don't even know exist. So this is a beginning of a lifetime process. The steps are a beginning of a lifetime process. With step 5, I tend to be really concise when I write a step 4. So when I write a step 4, if I read out every word, it tends to take an hour. But my mind, that's just because my mind works in very small phrases. So I can write very concisely. Not everyone can. My friend Narinda, when she did her step 4, when she did the first column of the resentment inventory, she got 672 names. Even you're impressed. Now, she didn't write about all 672. We found a way of doing it more concisely. But when I do step 5, what I want to do is understand the exact nature of my wrongs. And again, I'm going to quote Tom, who says, if the exact nature of your wrongs is you're a thief, then you say, I am a thief. Here are 2 good examples. You do not need to list in a step 5 every single item you've ever stolen. If you're a shouter, then you say, I shout a lot. Here are some of the worst, most embarrassing examples. You don't need to list the 18,000 times you shouted. You may need to write down the names for step 8, but that's a different question. And I find with step 5, the benefit comes from getting all of the material out in one session. So it might be anywhere between half an hour and 2 hours. And page 75 has got a single line which is very helpful. It talks about every twist of character, that's character defects or shortcomings, they're all the same. Twists of character, and every dark cranny of the past. A cranny is a corner, a dark corner of the past. So what that means in ordinary language is simply, where is my thinking wrong? Where is my attitude wrong? Where are my behaviours wrong? Give an example of each. And then what are the secrets? And they can be anything dark, anything nasty, anything you don't want to share in a meeting, anything you'd be embarrassed about people knowing. And the aim in step 5, I don't think, is to analyse. When I take someone through step 4, we go through, they read out everything as they go, and we make sure that it's understood and processed and done right. When we get to step 5, what we simply want to do is have all of the problems in one conversation so that me and the person I'm sharing the step 5 with can walk all the way around my problem, come back to the starting point. We now know the size of the problem. The danger with a step 5, which is, I know a group in London, they're good people. I won't go to the group. They're good people. They help a lot of people. But when they do step 5, it's every Sunday for a year. When I was in therapy, this was before AA, I'd get to the end of the therapy session. I'd start the therapy session with 1 problem and end the therapy session with 3. And then you're like, pick one, and we'll talk about that at the next session. I get to the end of the next session. That problem has now turned into 3. That's the opposite of step 5. Step 5 is when I can list what is wrong in my life on a couple of sheets of paper. And I think that's the reason I'm unhappy? Just that. So that's why it's so important. Okay, lots of detail in step 4. You get a gold star. This is helpful. It'll give you material for step 6 and 7. It'll give you material for steps 8 and 9. But in step 5, you want to share the condensed truth without leaving any of the highlights out. All the big stuff has to be out. Anything small and shameful has to be out. And then the other person, the most useful thing someone said to me in AA ever, this is literally the most useful thing. It was after my step 5, and my sponsor, Doug, said, "Shall we go for a pizza?" And I thought, you know all this and you still want to go for a pizza with me. Maybe I'm okay. So you'd think it would be something wise, and it wasn't. And I hate step 4. I hate step 5. It's a horrible experience. I get it done quickly. But I'm glad I'm even when I'm doing it, I'm glad I'm doing it. Because it's actually not as bad as not doing it. That's really bad. So your choice is between the pain of not doing step 4 and the pain of doing step 4. Just do the step 4. Step 6 and 7 in the big book is very short. And then you read the 12 and 12, which was written, I don't know, 15 years later, something like that, mid-50s. Interesting period. And suddenly step 6 and 7 are much longer. There are people that give long lectures on step 6 and 7. Go and listen to them. You're not going to get one from me. My experience is that when I'm at peace, I don't do anything wrong. When I'm not at peace, I can't do anything right. I'm at peace when I'm in contact with my higher power. When I'm out of contact, I'm not at peace. Everything goes wrong. So all of my character defects, I'm really looking at 2 buttons. Either keep or reject. Do I want to change or do I not want to change? I don't try and negotiate with individual ones. And my sponsor unhelpfully asks me to let go absolutely. And of course they don't tell you how to let go, they just tell you to let go. And then you ask how, and they say, I don't know, I guess you just let go. But I think most of us have had this experience in the material world where there's some project you're involved in and it's tense and everyone is arguing, everyone's having a horrible time, nothing is getting done, and eventually you say, I'm done, I'm out of here, I don't want anything to do with this, I'm going to go and do something else. And that's, to me, if I can apply that attitude to my life, that's what letting go absolutely means. So my whole list of demands, I'm done. I'm just going to stay small and do the next right thing, trust God. Stay small, do the next right thing, trust God. But then you have to get out there into the world. And there was an interesting question about a vision for you and how we withdraw from society and from life itself. And this person says, how do you reconnect to society that is not part of the fellowship? And the same it's a similar question to, I think several of the others are all really the same question. So now you've done the first 7 steps. You've said the step 7 prayer. You've said to God, you're in charge of my life. I'm in charge of the next right action. You're in charge of my life. I'm in charge of the next right action. Right. What do we do next? Well, you have to get out there with all the crazy people again. And how do I operate with crazy people or difficult people? And how do I operate in a world that plays by different rules? And someone said in one of the questions which was sent in advance, how do I apply the traditions in a relationship where where the other person is not applying the traditions? And the way I try and live is I'm not interested in the game that is being played. I'm not interested in the outcomes out there. So in my work, I work very differently to lots of my colleagues. I work to a certain standard, which means I just can't take on certain types of work, which mean that I would have to compromise my standards. So if something needs to be done and it takes a week to do it properly, I'm not going to do it in 2 days. Find someone else. I'm not responsible for the game. I'm responsible for my participation in it. If you don't play the rules by the rules, that's fine. I'm going to. And you can like that or you can not like that. And being self-supporting through my own contributions spiritually means that I'm relying on God, not what you think of me. So then I'm free to stop playing your game and start playing my role. Does that make any kind of sense? And
you don't feel a fire, you know what's a fire?
A chunk. A sucker or a chunk.
Where you're putting all your demands on the side and just doing this very small thing.
Yeah.
And relying on, I mean, you feel free maybe inside, but have this voice that tells you no, but it's not.
whose voice?
The ego voice, but still, it's very strong.
If you were sitting on the bus and there was a crazy person next to you, would you take seriously what the crazy person is saying? You see, with the ego monster, the only reason I listen to it is because it's mine. It's not because it needs listening to. So I don't listen to the crazy person on the bus. I don't listen to the crazy person in the meeting. I don't listen. When that voice starts, I say thank you for sharing and we get on with something else. There is a point, though, about being, so I don't get to become a pushover as a result of all of this. You've got a distinction between the appearance and the fact. So I get to say no a lot to certain types of behavior. So just because I'm trying to live a spiritual life doesn't mean that I don't say no. And this is best summed up. A friend of mine, I think I told this story last year, a friend of mine went to a rabbi, in fact, and said, one of my customers won't pay. Do I sue or do I forgive? And the rabbi said, first you forgive, then you sue. So I don't need to be an idiot here, because if someone's bad behavior is getting in the way of work that needs to be done, it needs to stop. And if I'm the one with the tools, I'm going to have to be the one to stop it. And I give you a really good example. Well, I think it's a good example. You decide whether you think it's a good example. Okay, so, and this will be a little bit on the concepts as well. Right, so if you are the chair of an intergroup, the members of the intergroup elect you. You are answerable to them. If the intergroup sets up a subcommittee and you're the chair of the subcommittee, you get to pick who's on the subcommittee. You are answerable to the intergroup, not to the volunteers. And I was on the subcommittee. I chaired a subcommittee in my AA region, London Region North. It was a service workshop. And I'm answerable to the whole region, like 550 groups through the region. That's who I'm working for. In the subcommittee, I said, right, who wants, I found some people who wants to help. I'm the chair. Now, we held meetings to decide, well, you're going to do the these, she's going to do the those. This is how the work gets divided up. And we tried to solve those matters of policy and finance. That's the decision-making level, policy, finance. By discussion, vote, and substantial unanimity. So you discuss it, you have a vote, and you try and get to a point where everyone agrees. If there's a big division, you haven't finished discussing it, because you're a single spiritual entity. So far, so good. So I appointed people to various roles. One role was to chair a particular session at this workshop. So they were introducing the speakers. Someone else on the committee that had some responsibility came up to me on the day and said, I really think it would be better if so-and-so, if this other person chairs instead. I think it would... they gave lots of reasons. And I said, no. We had someone in place for 2 months who'd made a gap in their schedule, who'd prepared the scripts, who knew the ethos of what we were trying to do. We're not going to do a last-minute replacement. So the answer is no. And the rage that came at me from this person for saying no at that point was, and I could see whispering going on over there, talking to other people, and lots of facial expressions and sighing. I always have to watch. If I sigh, why am I sighing? What am I trying to communicate with the sigh? But I held firm because I'm responsible not to the volunteer but to the intergroup. So that manipulation and that pressure, I'm not going to give in. So, and sometimes I need to be air and just move around things, and sometimes I need to be fire, and sometimes I need to be rock. And at this point, I needed to be rock. Water is the other one. Sometimes you need to soothe things, and then water is good. But I need to pray to my higher power, say, what do you want me to be in this situation? That person made amends to me a while later. They hadn't harmed me. It was a nuisance. They hadn't harmed me. But they made amends to me because that interference, apparently, she said, was deliberate, that she was trying to stir things up. So there's no problem being completely calm and poised and having your head in the clouds with God and being tough as anything. But it's got to be done with love for the person, even if the behavior is being stopped. And the image they gave me in Al-Anon was when the baby is screaming and trying to slap at you, you hold it like that. You hold it away from you so it can't hit you, but you don't punish it for doing what it's doing. And you can apply that to whole groups of people in society. You hold the person safe, don't punish, don't shame, but they need to be held at a safe distance. So there's a question here from someone who has, I'm not going to share the details, but has a close relative who's a drug addict, and the person hasn't hit rock bottom. And the question is how to be how to be loving and nice, but basically being kind but not enabling. How can you be kind to people without being enabling. I was enabling someone around 10 years ago who was dying. This friend, this very, very close friend of mine, was dying of alcoholism and drug addiction in front of him. And I was being the wrong thing. I was being the water. I was being the thing that soothed the person. And in doing so, I was stopping them from hitting their rock bottom. And as soon as I let go, I say as soon as, I let go under the instruction of my sponsor, and explained what I was doing, that if I carry on shielding him from the consequences of his actions, he's going to die. If I let go, he might still die, but he'll have a chance. 3 weeks later, he was in treatment in Texas. He's now sober, coming up to 9 years, I think. And we're still best friends. So it is possible, but that isn't how it always ends. But if I keep enabling, then they're going to die anyway. And my sponsor's ex-wife sponsor, Louise, would say, you might as well tell them the truth, because they're going to die anyway. They're grown-ups, you can just go with the truth, it's so much easier. And I've had to say to friends who are in active addiction, which is killing them and others, it's too painful having a ringside seat, a seat close to the stage. It's too painful for me to have a ringside seat to this. I'm going to have some distance, or I'm going to go when your ship goes down. When very large ships sink, if there are rescue ships which are too close, they get sucked down as well. Rescue ships. Interesting phrase. So I've got to make sure if someone is going down, sometimes I need to be at a distance. And I'll come to that in a sec. So kind and loving, it has to be... Kind and loving is not what the other person wants me to do. Kind and loving is what is in their best interests, and if you can communicate the fact that you still love them, regardless of what they do, whether they live, whether they die, whether they get well, whether they don't get well, that you're not going to let go of your love for them, even if you spend a year apart, that's the best you can do. Because that information goes in somewhere. And I think that's the definition of unconditional love, is being able to hold that truth that you will love them no matter what, without engaging in behaviour that's actually going to harm them. And someone doesn't have to have... I don't need someone's permission to behave well or to do the right thing. So sometimes people will scream when you do the right thing, but it's temporary screaming. What was your question?
Just when it comes to talking about holding the distance, and just how often sort of playing to high power and asking what that distance should be. How do you define what it is? You know, you might find that being around a certain person triggers you in the wrong ways, but like part of your job and part of my job in recovery is to learn to control that. So to have some control over my effects of my behaviour. So it's not really that person, it's more about there's a bit of confusion. So how would you learn to figure out what that distance would be, especially if you live with them?
If you live with them.
Can you repeat the question?
I'll do a shortened version of the question, partly for the tape as well. So how do you hold someone at a distance if you need to remain in some kind of relationship with them? In my experience, in 19 cases out of 20, the crazy dance just doesn't need to happen. So by that I mean, maybe I shouldn't see them, they can hang out with someone else. I don't need to expose myself to the craziness. There is enough craziness I can't avoid. Let's just stick with that. So no optional craziness modules. With the people I have to deal with, so some of my agencies, occasionally they'll have someone will have a really bad day. My mother, who is 90 and in a care home, and her mind is not working the way it used to, and there are emotions from 1943 which are coming up. And I'm the person in the room, so they come out at me. 2 tips. The first one, this tip is actually it's a whole way of looking at the world, is looking past surface appearance to the child of God inside them, and refusing to take the surface as the reality. So the aggression, the manipulation, the sighing, the face pulling, whatever it is, that's not who they are. That's a little picture above their heads. And you want to make sure that you remain in spiritual communication with the person, not with the crazy dance that they're dancing. So you look past. And the other thing I do is, I mentioned it earlier, is pause, and while I'm pausing, pray. I'm praying simply to come back to a point of peace. And when I'm at the point of peace, then I can say something. And if I need to get out of the situation, page 118, that's 118 of the big book, talks about stepping away from the situation. And that takes care of a lot of... sometimes I have to leave the situation abruptly. So I have to say, I'm going to put the phone down, I'm going to leave now. And they hate it, they scream. But it's fine, they can scream. But that gets respected more than if you remain in the fight. Eventually, everyone who I've been like that with has eventually calmed down and things have sorted themselves out. And also, because it's on my mind, I'm going to talk about steps 8 and 9 a little bit. I was thinking about... Thank you. So I was thinking about the cat, and some of her behaviour. So sometimes she comes in to my flat and she's sick on the carpet. Sometimes she jumps up on the curtains and pulls them. She claws at the carpet, and there's a patch of carpet which does not look like carpet anymore, and she claws at it. And if I'm working, she jumps on my lap, and then she jumps on the desk, and I have several computers all going at once. And she leans back across all of the computers at once, and I can't get to anything. And if I try and hit a key, she scratches. I mean, she's playing, but she scratches. Now, I have to set boundaries. So there are times I have to entice her out with these little cat treats called Dreamies, except we call them Dreamsies, I don't know why. So I put some Dreamsies in a bowl and put the bowl outside the flat, and she can't resist. So she goes out, I close the door, I do some work. So that's one option, is you set the boundary, and then she's going to have to deal with it. There's another flat she goes to during the day, so she can go, or she can hang out on her own. She's a grown-up cat. She can be fully self-supporting through her own contributions. that I needed to set a boundary. Or sometimes I just wait and maybe have a phone call, and eventually she comes off the computer and goes and chews something she shouldn't chew, but at least she's not on the computer. Now, the reason I say this, so I just let her, because it doesn't matter. It really, if I don't work for 15 minutes, NASA is not going to suddenly fail. It doesn't matter. I don't work in a nuclear power plant. Now, if my other half came in and was sick on the carpet, clawed at the curtains, and lay across the computer, I'd probably have a problem. I'd probably think they were behaving very badly. So why am I making a distinction? Why is the cat allowed to do it, but a person wouldn't be? So it's not, the offence is not caused by the behaviour. The offence is caused by the offence is caused by my interpretation of it. And so this is part of the question, how do you practice a program with someone that doesn't have a program? Doesn't have a formal program, or maybe they're just doing things differently. When I met my other half, there were, I'm not going to take it's not really inventory, I'm not going to say things about him here particularly, but there were 5 or 6 things that he does, which I noticed in the first year, which all my friends said, this is just crazy. Like sometimes the computer, one thing, okay, so the computer would go on a Saturday morning and it's sunny outside and I'm like, do you want to go to the park? Do you want to go to this? Do you want to go to that? No, he's playing some immensely complex strategy game on the computer. He's been playing the same game for 15 years. I don't understand it. And loads of people said, you shouldn't stand for that. You shouldn't accept the unacceptable. You're in a relationship, you should... And it just didn't feel right. I just decided to let him be. Just however you are is fine with me. This person has many virtues. Let's look at the virtues and allow him some modesty with things that I am tempted to judge. So and there's that, and there's some other stuff which is just, it's not bad, it's just weird. All of our friends comment on it. I've decided not to worry about any of that stuff. And the result of that is we've been together for 15 years and we haven't had an argument. So you get to pick the outcome you want. I decided I wanted a peaceful relationship, and I got that by looking past lots of stuff that other people found unacceptable. And I discovered, once I had been looking past it for long enough, none of it means anything. What means something is the substance of the relationship. And the substance of the relationship is not the washing up and the chores and the household tasks and the do we go on holiday here and why are we late for this and why did you spend the money on that. That's not the substance of the relationship. The substance of the relationship, we got an anniversary card when we'd been together for 13 years, which was a small boat, a little rowing boat with 2 dogs in the prow, in the front of the rowing boat. And the rowing boat was just gently flowing down the river. Now, if those dogs were not in a boat, they'd have to swim. But they were in a boat, they could just gently flow down the river. And my perception of the relationship is it creates a vessel that neither of us can create on our own. And so I'm able, with this other person, to sail through my life and get done what I need to get done. And he does as well. I mean, he's got a very important job. He's in charge of the health of literally millions of people in the UK. And so I discovered that what he needed at the weekend for him to be able to do his extremely senior, extremely demanding job was simply to be left alone with another heart beating in the same room. That was the only thing I had to do, was be another heart beating in the same room, not criticizing, not interfering, not trying to change him, not resisting, not obstructing, not arguing, just being. And that was something no one else could do, because no one else was in the kitchen. So the relationship was not what I thought it was about. All of the others, you work out the practical stuff. His relationship to finance is, shall we say, a little different than mine. So I'm very organised. I have lists. I literally know how every penny has been spent for the last, 15 years. I can tell you it's this percentage on supermarkets, and it's right. My other half has drawers full of items, and he doesn't know what's in the drawer. Just the mentality is completely different. So we've separated the finances. I run all the finances. I bill him twice a year. So I know what's going to work. So I have my life. He has his life. We have a common life together. The money is I'm in charge of. So we found a way through these things, one way and another. And the other story about that, and I always tell this story, but I think it's a helpful one. Well, I need to hear myself telling it. I was doing the dishes one day, thinking, I always do the dishes. It's always me doing the dishes. Couldn't you? I was thinking, maybe it would be someone else's turn to do the dishes. Just once a week would be nice. How about you start with once a week and gradually work up from there? But no, you're sitting there on the computer game and I'm doing the dishes. Now, he was not noticing what I was thinking. So I started to do the dishes loudly in order to communicate this verbal content. Like, if I do it loudly enough, he'll understand why. That didn't work. So we, go into third gear. And I said, it wouldn't hurt if you did the dishes occasionally. Thinking, well, this is a perfectly reasonable boundary. I've never mentioned this before. I'm allowed to say. And he left the room suddenly, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm in serious trouble here. And he came back about 10 minutes later, and his face was whiter. He's Irish, so he's very pale. And he said, I have never, ever criticized you. I could make a list as well. And he left the room. Now, I'm going to be frank, my other half is not keen on me coming to Israel because he's worried about my security. Whether that's crazy or not is his deal. But he did not stand in the way of me doing what I felt I need to do, which was to come here when I was invited. And so everything that I have given him, I've got back. The tolerance I've shown him, I've got back. And the other thing about dealing with people's character defects and craziness and emotions and so on is the application. I'm going to talk about this probably more tomorrow at the Traditions workshop, but Tradition 5. What is the job that we want to get done here? What is the outcome that we want to achieve? Let's achieve the outcome. However it gets done, is fine. We just need to achieve the outcome. And what the outcome doesn't need is for me to get upset, for me to get angry, for me to get emotionally involved in the situation. And he describes himself in his work life, and these are program principles, but he's never been to a program. I asked him once, how do you handle being tough in a work environment? So his position is very public. He gets publicly attacked for decisions he's made. And he has never lost his temper in those situations, remains completely calm and handles everything. So I'm naturally curious, how do you do this? And I asked him once, how do you handle it when people have a resentment against you and get upset in a work situation? Because it happens a lot. And he said, first of all, I'm embarrassed for them because it's so childish. Secondly, they need to get over it because it gets in the way. And that's what I need to realize when I'm faced with someone else's bad behavior. I need to work out, how can we achieve the outcome that needs to be achieved as simply and cleanly and clearly as possible. But to see that, I've got to be completely calm. Does that make sense? So I've got to remain emotionally detached from it. I'm going to have reactions at somewhere in my body. I can deal with that later. Right now, I need to remain in the right space. And Don Pritz, a very good AA speaker, deceased now, would say that the truth is like gold at the bottom of a river or a pond. Is a better image. And if the water is all stirred up, all the mud is stirred up and you can't see the gold, all you need to do is let it settle, and then the water becomes clear, you can see the gold at the bottom. I'm going to mention something about steps 8 and 9. So when I take step 8, I make a list of all the people that I've harmed, so done some kind of terrible thing to. A list of people who are strong enough not to have been harmed, but I owe an apology. Someone once apologized to my other half, and he said, the only thing that's offensive is the fact you think I would have been offended. That's offensive. So sometimes it's just I haven't harmed the person, but I do need to apologize, to recognize to them that I was wrong, and then we're back to normal. Sometimes I owe money, and sometimes I owe a debt of gratitude. So I've gone back to lots of people from school, from university, where I never thanked them at the time, and it's resolved all sorts of strange tensions that I had. And about the harm, I try and work out exactly what the harm was. And I think for me it works on 3 levels. The first level is just the basic surface harm. So I might take your money. I've stolen things in my drinking. I've damaged property on purpose when I was drinking. I've never hurt anyone physically, but I by accident hurt an animal physically once, or rather my negligence resulted in an animal suffering very badly. I can take people's time. I can disturb them emotionally, and I can be a nuisance. So just an unpleasant, annoying presence in someone's, distracting presence in someone's life. But the second level, I can't tell you how many relationships in my life where I've said one cruel thing or one unpleasant thing, and the relationship is now dead. So nothing else is happening. They don't talk to me. I don't talk to them. And this is the second layer. The first thing that I did was nothing. It was a moment of upset. But then the damage is the lost relationship over many years. And I had this with my parents, actually. That there were very minor incidents, but then we didn't speak for months. And then there's, I think, a deeper spiritual harm that can be done, where, and I do this in various ways. If you go to an AA group or an Al-Anon group, and you're one of the longer, sober people there, everyone's watching, everyone's paying attention, and they watch what you're doing, and if you behave badly but don't apologise, it licenses other people to do the same. And it happens without people realising that it's happening. And I've seen this in AA groups where an old-timer will criticise another group or another way of doing things in AA. And then suddenly their sponsees start doing it, and then the whole group is doing it. But it starts, people are watching for anyone in authority. And if they can do it, well, I can do it. So there's leading people in the wrong direction spiritually. There is deepening someone's sense of separation from God and their true selves. So not just misleading people, but deepening the problem. And lots of the things I did as a child, there was a situation at school where a boy was being bullied, and it was a boarding school, so we're all enclosed together. There was a boy being bullied, and I didn't take part in the bullying, but I didn't defend the boy, I didn't do anything to stop it, I just watched it happening. And that bullying would have caused, because I was bullied as well, it's not just the pain when it's happening, it changed my sense of who I was. It deepened the underlying spiritual problem. There was an adult in my life that when I was 14, 15, 16, that would invite me into his office to shout at me for up to an hour. And I still to this day don't understand why. This caused emotional suffering, but it caused a twist in my personality, which took years to resolve. So this is a deeper level of harm. I also harm people by keeping them by stopping them from growing, by taking responsibility for them. When you've been sober a while, if you're lucky, people will phone you asking questions. And about what do I do here? What do I say to this person? And every time I answer that question, when they should be looking to the literature, looking to God, looking to their own spiritual principles they've learned, I'm stopping them from growing, because I'm taking their responsibility from them. And so there are lots of different harms, and some of these in step 9 have required me going and making an overt amend. This is what I did. I shouldn't have done it. It was wrong of me. I can't imagine what harm it caused, but I want to make it right. Sometimes it's an apology. Sometimes it's paying the money back. But there are times when the amend, in my case, has had to be indirect. And I'll give you 2 examples. There are 3 places in the Big Book where it gives examples indirectly, directly and indirectly, of when we don't make direct amends, because if we did, it would harm them or others. And they're kind of hard to find. It doesn't say these are the examples, so you have to look for it. The first one is where it says, I think this is top of 77, that our main purpose is to fit ourselves to be of maximum service to others. And so the question is, if I make this amend, will it put me in a position that I'm more useful or less useful? And this becomes relevant. If someone knows what I've done, I can't do harm by admitting it because they know it already. The only thing in my experience that can come from that is good. I bet there are exceptions. You don't need to come and queue and tell me what the exceptions are. There are occasional exceptions. But I've got to be really careful with the other two, and that's involving third parties, involving other people, and revealing new information. And there was one very small act of theft when I was drinking from an establishment where the establishment gave me the job because my father, who was the mayor of the town, asked them for a special favour to give me the job. And the discussion with my sponsor was, we didn't want my father's reputation to be damaged by revealing that I'd been stealing this amount, which they didn't know about. You can only mend what's broken, and you can't break something in order to mend it. The other one was much more difficult. When I was 15 years sober, I had to go through the steps again, and I had an immensely difficult relationship with my mother. The short version is we're fine now. We really are. I see her every day. I look after her. I look after her all her affairs. I look after her financially as well. It's all dealt with. But then things were bad. And I'd learned how to behave well, as I'd been taught how to behave well in AA, but my heart wasn't in it. It was just horrible to see her in psychic pain. She's lost, several of her children died. She's had a difficult life in many ways. It was difficult watching her psychic pain. It was difficult remembering my psychic pain from my childhood, which I remembered every time I was there. And I had to forgive her for I knew intellectually she wasn't trying to harm me on purpose. But I still felt very strongly the pain from 30 years earlier. So there was that layer of forgiveness and accepting that she may never get well. She's got a lot better over the last 11 years, mentally and emotionally. But then we didn't know. She was very depressed. I forgave her, but then I needed to make amends. What were the amends for? She was in pain every time she saw me. And I couldn't work out why, because my behaviour was fine. I've been taught how to behave well. I've been taught how to be a good son. So I fulfilled the duties, but my heart wasn't in it. And I was walking along the road, and I said to my higher power, can you show me what the exact nature of the wrong is? And the higher power said to me, or the thought came into my mind, you're a fake. That's why she's in pain. So you're play acting a good son, but she doesn't believe it, and she's right not to believe it, but she doesn't even know this. This is below the level. This isn't thought through. She can't work at those multiple levels. To reveal the exact nature of my wrong as I saw it would be to give her information she had no skill to process. I could not say, yeah, I've been faking it for 15 years. You're right, I never wanted to be here. I love you in principle, but I'd rather be somewhere else. I'm really sorry. What can I do to make this right? That conversation is not going to help, and it's not going to heal anything. So the amend had to be made indirectly. Something needed to change. And acting in accordance with how I felt was not going to work. I've tried separation from close family, and you're just as linked to, or I was just as linked to them, never seeing them, as when I'm there every day. the bond, because the bond exists at a spiritual level. So not being next to each other doesn't help, in my experience. I needed to find a way to be with her. So that didn't work. So I was going to have to become the person I'd been play acting. And to cut a long story short, I was shown how to look past, I mentioned this earlier, look past the surface, look to the person inside. I only realised afterwards that what was happening, but I prayed and prayed and prayed. It was my mother's 80th birthday. I went to see her, knowing it would be just as bad as ever. And she opened the door, and the person I saw opening the door was not my mother. It was an entirely different person. I had not been having a relationship with my mother. I had been having a relationship with my interpretation of my mother, and that was the problem. But that took willingness at a very deep level to open that door, and then it's taken 10 years of follow-up action, sometimes on a daily basis, for her to believe that what she saw on her 80th birthday is actually true. Yeah.
The willingness was expressed in a prayer?
Was the willingness expressed with a prayer? The willingness was expressed with a prayer and buying a train ticket. So I needed to do both. I needed to take action. I needed to take the action I could take. God will do for me what I can't do for myself, but God won't do for me what I can do for myself. What can I do? I can pray. I can go to 100,000 meetings. I can read my big book on the train, and when the door opens, we'll see what happens. Different societies vary, and in the UK, a lot of communication is below the surface, and people very much dislike open discussions. British people hate receiving amends. It's one of their 7 least favourite activities. I won't say what the others are. They hate they hate honesty and openness, and that it strikes them as American and suspect, and everything is always said backwards. Like in England, if you have a work meeting with someone and it's going really well, be suspicious, because at the end of the meeting they're going to say, there's one tiny thing I need to just it's probably nothing, but there's just one tiny thing I need to mention. That was the whole purpose of the meeting. The rest of it was an introduction. I can't tell you how many bad experiences I've heard with people listening to tapes of American speakers, going in, copying exactly what they said to a British recipient. In America, friends of mine say they'll go to someone and say, I'm in a 12-step fellowship, I'm in recovery from addiction from this and addiction from that, and I'm on a spiritual path, and I know that I've caused you harm and I'd like to make amends, and it gets received very well. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard in the UK. You do that to someone, someone said to a sponsee of mine, I'm number 47 on your list. I'm surprised you didn't come earlier. There are ways of doing things in different cultures. So I've made my amends, but often quietly, without no trumpets, no I'm on a spiritual path, but I let people know that I was really quiet conversations in a corridor between 2 other events. That's how British people like to have amends made. They don't want to know that someone else is making amends. They just quiet. And this has healed a lot of things, where a badly made amend can actually make things more awkward and weird between people. So I've learnt to be guided by my instinct on how to make it right, and I've never been guided wrong. And sometimes, just one last thing, and then we'll have a well-deserved break. There are some sometimes in recovery, especially if people have different approaches to AA or whatever the A is, you end up with different schools of thought in the same room. And this group of people never talk to that group of people. And have you ever come across coded sharing? So when someone says, now I'm just going to share my experience, but what they then do is they covertly criticize another person in the room. Now, of course, one does have to, you do have to make choices. I do things this way and not that way. Fine. But sometimes you can see there are funny little attempts to admonish or punish which go on in the sharing. And little enmities develop. And if I've got a sense in my home group that there's someone where there's just something weird going on and they won't talk to me, and I just go and sit next to them a lot and ask them how their day was. And initially they hate it, but I stop being difficult with them and they stop being difficult with me. So I don't want people in my life that I can't talk to. I want to be able to talk to anyone. And so this is all part of the amends process, is learning to be at peace with everyone. You're not going to go on holiday with them, fine. But you can ask how their week was and know when the time to move on is. And so that's my amends experience. And just one last thing. When I cleared the list, I said to my higher power, is there anyone else I have unfinished business with that I can't find? That I could find, in fact. There are people I can't find. Is there anyone that I could do anything else to make amends for? And when the answer finally came back, it's like rinsing a cloth from soap suds. You rinse and eventually the water is clean after the 7th rinse. And it's like that with amends. You rinse and rinse and rinse, and eventually you get to the point you're good with everyone. And as far as you can find them, the people you can't find, there's a list, you're ready. Or you make alternative amends to the universe. That's when I was able to let go of everyone else. I don't know why those are connected. I didn't make up the rule, I'm just reporting the rule. But until my side of the street is clean, I'm going to be really interested in your side of the street. Once mine is clean, do what you want with yours. So I'm going to stop there. Let's have a break for 15 minutes. Is that all right? That's good. Lovely. Thank you.